that were better at this than me. And I saw them kind of one by one sort of drop off because they couldn't or wouldn't adapt. And somehow, some way, I got hit with this lightning bolt of an idea. If Hollywood wants IP, then why don't I just give them IP, right? And so I took an original idea that I knew I couldn't sell in a million years in Hollywood as a spec or a pitch, and I wrote it as a short story. I got the short story published, and like literally overnight, we had a bidding war on it in Hollywood. We had Justin Lin on one side coming off of Fast 6, which was at that point the largest opening in Universal summer history. It might still be. We had Robert De Niro on the other side with Brett Ratner. Tyler Perry came in and made an offer. It was this big deal, right? And my agents thought it was a fluke at that point, but I sensed it. I knew that this is where the business was heading. And so I doubled down on it. I tripled down on it. And so, I just started kind of churning out IP, to make, this long story short. I have since, done that 7 more times with short stories. I sold a TV series to Lionsgate, with David Diggs attached to it. And that was based on a short story that I wrote years ago. I have started since then doing it with comic books. My first book, Aberrant, 2 weeks before the second issue hit comic shops, it was optioned for TV by Tony Krantz, and we're turning it into a TV series now. Tony Krantz did 24 and Felicity and is doing Wu Assassins at Netflix. And so I did what I had to do to survive. One of my huge revelations, and I think it is a revelation that hopefully we can kind of instill in you coming out of film school, is that I don't think it is enough to be a screenwriter right now. I think you have to be a writer. You have to be a storyteller. You have to produce stories and content. Again, opportunity in Hollywood can be, it can be tough. You have to find, and so if they won't let you in the front door, find a way around, find the side door, find the back door. And I think that's what we've all did. And it was great, listening to the intros and hearing, Melody say, well, I'm a playwright. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Amanda saying that she writes, late night television. Melody selling podcasts. And I know you guys will kind of, build out this thesis. But you need to be doing kind of what you can to kind of survive. You need to make yourself a generator of ideas, a storyteller. Now, we are all screenwriters, and what you guys probably already know is sitting there as film students is that, like, okay, well, let's say you write a big bad Hollywood movie and it never gets made. It sits on a shelf, and after 15 years of working in this business, I have dozens of dead children sitting on my shelf that will never be seen by anybody. And the beauty of creating, telling a story first in as a book, as a comic book, as a short story, as a podcast, as anything, is that you have these stories to tell, right? And they become something. They go out into the world and they live this life, right? And people consume them, and people are entertained by them, and people message you and say they're moved by them. And so all I'm saying is, maybe you'll come right out of film school like I did and sell a script, and you'll be a screenwriter right off the bat. That happened to me, and I hope it happens to you. But there will be bumps in the road, because 3 years later, I couldn't sell a script to save my life, and I had to find a new way. And so comics or any of these things became my other way. Now I'm going long here, but I will lay out the soul food. This is the other why, and then I'll throw it over to my compatriots here. The Hollywood only makes a certain kind of film right now, with it's getting better, but it's a certain kind of film with featuring certain kind of people, and they want it written a certain way, right? They make about 5 different kinds of films right now, and as I always sound like an idiot. I came here to make Pulp Fiction. I ended up getting stuck writing big action movies for people. I sound like a moron when I complain about doing that. And I don't really mean to complain about it, because, look at my wall. I love Die Hard. I love Beverly Hills Cop. I love Action Jackson. I love these movies more than anything. Also, there's this other side of me, and I get to write those, and that is awesome. But there is this other side of me that needed to kind of be nourished and be able to express itself. I wanted to tell stories about other people, in other places. And the beauty of comics is that you can tell any story, any kind of way, As long as it's good, you will find an audience. You will find a publisher that is excited about it. You will find some way to get it out into the world. And then the irony of all that is that once it's a comic book, then Hollywood will take it seriously. Then they will look hard at it. You know, you know, so so there's that. So you know, I mean, for me, it was like it was really about. I mean, you know, telling. I got very good at telling those 5 kinds of stories that Hollywood likes to tell, and telling them the way that they wanted me to tell them. Right? You know, they bought my house. I'm very thankful for those movies. But after 12 years of doing it, I had to take a hard look and be like, I don't know if I can do this for another 12 years. Like I was creatively stifled. I was not, my soul was not being fed, but more importantly, my writing got stale. My writing got bad. And that was a problem. That was going to wash me out of the business. And so I needed to do something to kind of reinvigorate myself as a writer. And comics ended up being that. So when I moved into comics, I embraced that you can tell any story any kind of way. I made a pact with myself that I was never going to tell a straightforward story, that I was going to double down on experimental elements, that I was going to play with structure, that I was going to, you know, tell stories out of order. You know, the second issue of Banjax is told from the point of view of a man who is literally, he hasn't slept in 7 days and he's literally being driven mad because of it. And so you are seeing the story through his eyes, but you don't know what's real and what isn't. And you're ultimately given no answers. You know, in the end, you're left to kind of sort through it. Banjax in general, Banjax is kind of a Batman and Robin story. And so the odd issues are told from the Batman's point of view. The even issues are told from the Robin's point of view. Each man is telling the same story, but they have a very different, very sort of prejudiced take on what happened. You know, it's all seen through their own, you know, mental filters, their own, each man believes he is right. You're presented with both sides of the story. You're given no answers in the end. You're left in the end to kind of sort through it. And you know, and being able to kind of just play with drama, play with character, play with structure in that way, it made me feel alive again. It fed my soul. It made me be excited to sit down at the computer. And then the irony of all of it was it started to kind of find its way into my film work. This TV show I was talking about that I just set up. It's a heist deal, and I've written probably a half dozen heist movies in my life, and I'm good at phoning in the heist movie. And I could have done that again here and got paid, and it would have been great, but it never would have gotten made. I know that because you guys can attest to this. Every room that you walk into in Hollywood, every production company has 2 heist movies in production, and none of them will ever not in development. None of them will ever get made because they're all the same essentially, right? And so, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at, you know, you'll spend a year working on this, right? And I couldn't spend another year doing that. It wasn't worth my time. It wasn't worth theirs. And so I just kind of took the gloves off and I said, you know what? You know, all this stuff that I'm doing in comics that has kind of like invigorated me, that's made me feel alive. What if I just did that here? What if I said, screw it, tossed everything aside and just did all of that? And so I did it. So I wrote this thing and I went crazy. I mean, and I'm playing with structure, and I have 2 unreliable narrators contradicting each other and butting heads, and I'm telling the story in this bonkers way, and you know, I loved it. It was like going, you know, 120 miles an hour in a Ferrari, like down the PCH, howling at the moon. It was awesome, and I turned it in. I didn't tell them I was doing it, and they read it. And it took them a little longer than it should have to process it, and I was worried. I'm like, am I going to get fired on this thing? Did I just mess up? I really need this money. I got to pay my mortgage. But then they gathered everybody. We got on the notes call, and I'm waiting to get reamed, and they're like, we read it and we love it. Like, go back, all this stuff you're doing, double down on it, give us more, do us this, do us that, you know. And that's what got a star interested in it. And that's what got a studio interested in it, is because it was different. It's like they sit down and they're prepared to read the cookie cutter heist film, and it wasn't that. It was different. It was a curveball, and they loved it. And now that's why it's going to get made. And I owe it all to comics. I owe it all to diversifying my bonds like these other people are doing. And so that is my how and why. And so I am going to throw it to you guys for, you know, evil origin stories, how you got into comics, why you got into comics. I'm not going to call on anybody. You know, why don't we just go into it? Who wants to go first? Or should I call on somebody? You guys are too polite.
Avallone.
Okay, go ahead, Avallone.
Of course, I'm muted because it's the 21st century.
Yeah.
My evil origin story is I arrived in Hollywood in 1987 and had the immediate reaction. I was looking for a movie to see on a weekend, looked in the newspaper, and it suddenly occurred to me for the first time in my life, oh, I don't want to make anything that people are making now. That means studios aren't going to buy anything I want to write. Okay, maybe I should have thought of that before I drove 3,000 miles and rented an apartment. But my love of film from early childhood was still there. So I just kept it indie the whole time. In the 90s, I tried a little bit to work in the studio system, couldn't get through the door, couldn't get an agent, didn't have the connections, didn't have the pedigree, didn't have any of those things. And, you know, as Rylend said, he called them dead children. I always compare writing a script to being Frankenstein. And then you finish it and the agent gets it or whoever, and it goes out to people, which is the calling down of the lightning. And then you pound it on the chest and say, give my creation life. And then that doesn't happen. You have a basement full of dead bodies, which is just awesome. There are two streams, and Rylend addressed this. There's what do you want to do that makes you happy? And there's how are you going to live and survive? I did that by taking various production jobs. I did some writing back in the day. I ghost wrote some low budget movies, but ultimately I didn't find, unlike Rylend, I found no home at the studios, and was always a writer, but didn't really think of myself that way, thought of myself more as a director. And then when this, as I mentioned in my intro, when the opportunity to write comics came along, and this is something I will sidebar and say, storytelling is what we all do. Doesn't matter what variation of it is. Storytelling is the art. Film, comics, short stories, theater, those podcasts, those are crafts. I maintain that if you can tell a story, learning the difference between various formats and learning is something you should take seriously, but if you know storytelling, it is something you can master. And when I had this opportunity to write comics, I literally, like, some of them I had already read, but I took down the Scott McCloud Understanding Comics from the shelf. I read the Will Eisner book. I read Dave Booher is looking over his shoulder at his bookshelf. We all have those books. Just like in film, it's Sid Field, it's McKee, who I think is overrated, which is going to mean nobody takes me seriously from here on in. It's, you know, there's all of the standard, you know, Save the Cat, I think is one of the books. The 21-day screenplay. There we go. David's got all of them.
Here it is.
Yeah,
those same books exist for filmmaking. That exist for filmmaking exist for comic books. And I encourage you, if you're gonna try this, read those books too, and learn. It's not impenetrable. It is. Matter of fact, most books about writing comics have about 40 pages of solid advice in them, and about 60 pages of filler. Because after you get through those 30 pages about page turns, about pacing, about issue length, about panel size, about page layout, then you kind of run out of things to say and say, hey, my friend has an article that says much of the same thing. We're going to reprint it here. Almost every book on writing comics is like that. So I encourage you to read them. I also encourage you to read them as a filmmaker, because they are about visual storytelling. And there are things to learn about filmmaking from reading comic books. There are things to learn about pacing from reading comic books, and there are things to learn about all of it, about storytelling in general from reading comic books, because it's a different language to tell the same information. And what Rylend went through, I know so many studio film writers who have what I call the cocktail party problem, which is they have a beautiful house, they make $1 zillion a year, and someone says, oh, what have you done that I would have seen? And they can't answer that question because they've been writing for 20 years and nothing has ever been actually made into a film. So that is one of the dangers of going down that road. It might buy you a nice house, and you might also never, ever see anything done, which is why I stayed in the indie world. The last movie I produced, I actually did a Kickstarter for. We'll probably talk more about Kickstarter. The thing that's great about comic books is we all know the bar to make a film is lower than it's ever been financially. The bar to make a comic book is 5% of that bar. You got to find an artist. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I bet some of you can draw. Certainly, I bet most of you can draw better than I can. So there's that. So all that to say, as Rylend has said, comic books are a good place to get out the idea that you don't think you can sell, and that it's not even about selling. It's just a story you want to tell. And the great thing about the way things work now is that, ironically, the studios tend to treat the comic book industry as the R&D department, the underpaid, underfunded, underloved R&D department. And they troll us for stories. I mean, everyone looks at the creativity of the MCU and the TV shows, and it's like, those of us who've been reading comic books since the 70s are like, there are 1 trillion stories in those comic books that they have not even begun to touch the outskirts of. So all that said, it's a low bar for telling your story and for getting out your ideas. So the last thing that I will say about the ironic connection between the two is, after not being able to get arrested in the studio system, I started writing comic books for a bunch of years. And then literally the first time someone hired me to walk through the gates at Paramount and pay me as a writer was because I was a comic book guy. A friend of mine was developing Red Sonja, and they put out the word that they were looking for people who understood comic books and understood that language. And since then, I've been doing development for for their very successful motion picture and television company for about 2 years. In my 34 years in independent film meant nothing to Paramount Pictures. My 6 years of writing comic books was very relevant to their interests. So, you know, it can all work for you in ways that you do not expect it to. And now I turn it over to Amanda Deibert.
Nicely done.
So we left off with me dangling naked on the side of a cliff, and I'll keep me there for a little while. I'm the literal cliffhanger.
All about narrative suspense.
She's playing with structure, even in this.
Did I survive? Did I make it? Did I die naked at the bottom of a mountain? We may never know.
Amanda, voiceover. You might wonder how I got
there. Record scratch.
Cut to.
Yeah, so I think that there's so much interconnection with all of these industries now, especially more than ever. And as has been said previously, at the end of the day, we're storytellers, and being able to tell stories is fulfilling. It's also fun to play with different mediums. It's fun to work with very talented visual artists and see the way that they interpret something. It's collaborative in the way that film is, but you have a smaller team. It's very good for helping you with show don't tell, because comic book is the ultimate distillation of show don't tell, because everything's visual and you don't actually have a lot of room on your panel for dialogue. So you gotta, if you have a big monologue, it's gonna cover up all the art on the page. So like, sorry, get that shit down to 3 sentences or you're screwed. So you've got, or, you know, cut it up panel by panel with some interesting visuals. It helps train your brain in a really good visual way. So I want to say that too. It's a great asset. It's going to make you a better writer if you learn to write for comics. It was very helpful for me writing in animation. So He-Man is the first animated show that I've written on. But because I come from a comic book background, it was very easy for me, because animation, more so than traditional like live action screenwriting, is a much more, again, visual medium where you know, your descriptions are going to be a little more prevalent than they would be in maybe some other things that you're used to writing. So comic books will help with that as well, help you start thinking about that, the visual sight gag kind of thing. So I just wanted to say that before I forgot, that there's a lot about writing comics that will just in general make you a better writer. And it's also just so fulfilling to have things that you can put out and they're out in the world much more quickly. It's not years and years of, oh, it auctioned, is it ever going to get made? Oh, there was a pilot made. Oh, it didn't. You know, we have in our industries, in both of these industries, there's so much of like, I wrote this thing, now will anything happen with it? And that's why I also think it's a good idea to have as many things going on as you can for your sanity. For me, writing on shows and writing a screenplay for myself and writing comics has enough things going on that I can't put all my hopes on just one thing and sit around pining away and waiting for it to happen. Like, oh God, this person wants to make my thing. And now I'm going to sit and stare at the wall for the next 10 days and wonder if they're going to call me back. Like, that's why it's really good. No, go write a comic book instead. Great. That producer's interested. If they call you back, great. If not, well, guess what? You just wrote another comic book, and guess what? You just wrote another thing, and you've got your podcast going, and like, it will save your life to not put all the pressure you have on your one precious thing. And I, more than anything in the world, I really, really recommend you do that, because I made myself nuts in my early 20s. Both as an actress, which is where I started, and then as a writer, just like waiting, did they like me? Will they call me? It's just not a way to live. So anyway, dangling on the cliff, started making my own webcomics, because also produce your own content however you can. It really will help you. So these were webcomics that my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were doing. That collaboration worked out. And then I was also doing, so this was a time of web series. So I was still an actress. I was doing some web series. I started doing some YouTube videos that were jokes. I did one that was a Batman joke. It went around the DC Comics offices, and between our web comic that we had done and that joke video, I got contacted by an editor at DC who said, hey, do you want to write a Wonder Woman story? So this is what I mean by it all being connected. I did a YouTube video, and that got me writing for Wonder Woman, which in return has been more interesting to some people in television. And my comics writing is ultimately what got me onto He-Man. It all just does a big circle. It really all is connected, because if you're writing good content, people like it, that's what's going to matter. All the mediums help each other and support each other. And also, this is a one industry town. Like, you're in LA, everybody works in TV and movies. That's not that interesting at a cocktail party. Nobody really cares that you're making a movie, because every single person at the party is making a movie. So if you've got comics, oh, I'm working on this comic book, whether it's for a company like DC or it's your own IP, at least it's something that not everybody at the party is doing. And they'll be like, oh my God, cool. People in job interviews, in writers' rooms, always care more about what I'm doing in comics than anything I've done in the industry that we both work in together. It's just how life works. Do other things, just in general, even beyond comics, even beyond, like, please do things to make yourself interesting.
Can I just quickly say, as an aside, I know Amanda probably hates it when I tell this story.
I knew you were gonna.
5 years before we met through comics, we had worked on something together, and I had completely forgotten. And I would stare at her at cons going, where do I know this woman from? We did an indie film called A Marine Story, which is about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in which I was the first AD, but I also played a sheriff's deputy, and Amanda played attractive crackhead number one. If I remember.
I love that you say attractive. That's definitely not.
Well, me. I mean,
but
there were a lot of crackheads in that room. Not everybody was pretty. But yeah, that is actually how we. It took me a while to realize that was actually where I recognized her face from.
So Avallone said it, and now Amanda said it, and I think you're going to hear it echoed over and over again. Please, please, please do not wait for permission to tell your story.
There it is.
Hollywood loves to do that. Hollywood lives to do that. Hollywood is sort of run and fueled by some demon who is powered by doing that. You can sit on your hands, like Amanda said, and you can waste away in this business waiting for Hollywood to give you permission to have your story come to life. Go out and do it. And that doesn't preclude you from then having a $150 million movie made based on your story. But, if you wait, no one will ever see it. Find a podcast, make a comic book, write a short story. Any of these things work. Get your stories out into the world and good stuff will happen. And it's like Amanda says, it's like every meeting I walk into, they want to know about the comics. They want to know about the short stories. They want to know about the other stuff that I'm up to. They want to know more about when I was on American Ninja Warrior than they do about what I'm actually doing in the film business. That makes me more interesting. So make yourself an interesting person.
You were not on American Ninja Warrior, were you?
Yeah, I was.
See, I've been tuned out for like an hour, and then you say that, and I'm like, "Oh, Rylend has something to say." Just kidding.
We could talk about that, but Melody, why don't you give us your how and why and your nuggets of wisdom?
Well, I would of course echo a lot of what's been said, but especially for those film students who are outside of the normal box and outside of those who often might get work. So if you're a woman, if you have LGBTQ stories, if you have BIPOC stories, a lot of times Hollywood, it's beginning to get kind of, interested in those stories, but it's sometimes still hard. So even more so, you have to double down on not only telling the stories, but telling the stories from your point of view. And that's what you get to do with IP. And my story is, I didn't add that I also was on the recent season of Law and Order SVU as story editor. And that kind of came to me through my social issue and playwright background. And the Warren Leight, who is the showrunner for that, was a playwright himself to start. So really the idea that you just get out there and create on whatever platform has been true for me as well. And it's funny because I came to comic books and to writing on my first TV show at the very same time. So I was writing a comic book for the first time, learning the format for the first time at the same time that I was writing in my first room as a staff writer. So I was on 2 Sentence Horror Stories, which is an anthology. It's now up on Netflix. The episodes are about 24 pages long, 24 minutes long, 24 pages. And that happens to be what I needed to write for comic book. So my comic book OMNI is published by Humanoids, and Mark Wade had heard about me and my work, had read one of my TV pilots, a sci-fi pilot. He loved it. And he said, all right, can you pitch for OMNI? And I just came up with I didn't know what that meant exactly for comic books, but I came up with ideas for several issues and an extensive docket. And he's like, you had me on the first page of that. Come on board. We want you to write it. So I had to learn how and writing comic books is very different than anything else I'd written before. I'd had to stab at writing. I'd written plays, had to stab at writing some books. And now I was writing comic books. And my brother, Chris Cooper, which is kind of another story. Yes, the Central Park Birder, who I posted the video of, he wrote for Marvel. So he wasn't happy that his sister was now writing for comics. Like, what? But, I picked his brains a little bit. Really, I just had to dive in because I was in the writer's room and needing to slap all kinds of ideas up against the wall for an anthology, which was perfect, dovetailing with comic books. And so this is a way that I think for those of you who are interested in television, it's the kind of stories that you have to come up with and ideas that you have to come up with in a room actually applies to the different ideas that you have to come up with per issue. So that was really helpful for me. And then the length of my scripts, because I was writing anthology and it was short form, was perfect, dovetailing with comic books. And And then the idea of being very visual, the idea that comic books kind of parallel storyboard, and all of that really dovetailed together, so that even though I was working on two things that were really kind of might have been grueling, they actually fed into each other, and I love that anyway. I'm if you're one of those people that needs to like churn, I think comic books are also great because there's a turnaround, and that turnaround also complements television, which is fast. Podcasts I'm just now getting into, but podcast is something that also aligns with television. Obviously, we know a lot of podcasts have transitioned to television, those ideas. And what I loved is the first podcast that I sold, it was pitched off the top of my head because they weren't interested in horror, which I thought they were when I had the meeting. And then because I've been working in comic book where you could create whatever you wanted. They could go to another country, another planet. You could do whatever you wanted. You didn't have a budget, right? So I thought, well, podcast is kind of like that. So I pitched something that I've always wanted to do, always wanted to see, this thriller, and they loved it. I didn't even have a treatment for it, nothing, and they bought it. So the idea of thinking quickly on your feet, thinking outside of the box, having fun. And I think Rylend said it, like going bonkers. It's just, it allows you to break through limits and to do something different and be seen as doing something different. And I also direct, and I have a shopping agreement to direct a horror comedy feature. And again, everything that I've taken in from working in comic books and working in short form television and working in podcasts, all of that's going to inform my creativity. So when you do that and work multi-platform, I think it really breaks story in a different way, and it lets you be unique, and it lets you explore your own voice. And that's what Hollywood wants. They want, and Hollywood wants unique voices, and voices that are exciting and different. And you get to explore that, I think, more the more that you work through different platforms. And I grew up loving comic books. I'm looking forward to doing some horror comics. I started a women's film group for horror called NYX NYX Horror Collective. And it's for women horror writers and filmmakers. And we have a short form 13-minute horror film festival that's going to be up on a major streamer, which I can announce soon, but not yet. And and I don't have any content in this. I've just wanted to give other women horror creatives a chance to put content out there, because it is about creating IP. It is about creating content so that you don't sit around and wait for someone to say, well, women like to write horror, women like to direct horror. Show them, let them see it, and let them come to you. So I'm a great, great believer in that. And in terms of, and also look for mentors. Devin Grayson, the amazing and wonderful Devin Grayson, helped me. I didn't read any books on writing comic books. I read a lot of comic books, and Devin was really helpful. She said, I'm just going to look at what you're putting forward. I'm going to answer your questions. I'm going to push you out of the nest and let you fly. And that was probably the best thing for me. And she was wonderful. And having a great mentor, look to people who can help you through the new and different platform and the different medium that you're working in. So you're not reinventing the wheel completely. And there are people out there who are willing to, to help you.
Hey, Melody, they're asking for the name of that group again. Could you repeat it, or maybe drop the info in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in here too in the chat, but it's NYX NYX Horror Collective. And on Friday, August 13th, we're starting for a month. We're going to be on a major horror channel, and with the 13 Minutes of Horror Film Festival. And yeah, I'm really excited about that, because it's important for us to get our work out there. But then, the people who I am supporting, they're supporting me, and you create this community. I say that's the other thing too, is creating community is really important, because there are people now who want to work with me and hire me for rooms. I'm going to have a chance to set up a room and hire people, and it just all comes around, and it's really nice to remember that too.
Yeah, and I think I mean Melody said this, but let me hit it right on the head. I feel like at the Los Angeles Film School, you guys are being trained as kind of world-class chefs, and so I guess what we're telling you is like, don't just cook chicken. There's a lot of other stuff to cook there, a lot of other ingredients to mess with and play with, a lot of other ways to kind of present food to the world. So diversify your bonds. David Booher, you've been sitting patiently. Why don't you give us your how and your why and your supervillain origin story and all that stuff?
Sure. Well, I did not go to a school to become a world-class chef, it turns out. I, as I mentioned, I went to law school, and it's so fun to listen to everybody else's story, because I came to writing so much later in my life. I always wrote, and I wrote when I was in college and that sort of thing. But I went to business school, and then I went to law school at USC, and I graduated in 2004, and I went to a law firm. And the reason I actually started writing seriously was because it was so heinous. It was so bad to work at this law firm. It was just, 14-hour days and just cranking it out. So I started with escapism, and my journey to screenwriting and comics was my journey learning how to write story. So I started writing just on my own. I wrote 3 books. All of them were terrible. None of them saw the light of day. There's one in particular, an idea I loved, and this is going to be my suggestion to everybody who's listening, is pursue the stories you love, to the ends of the earth if you have to. So I wrote this novel, and it was terrible, and but I loved the idea. And so then I started looking at potentially screenwriting, and I went to the UCLA professional program, and I brought that idea with me, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to make it into a movie. And of course, it's like $100 million movie, because that's what you do when you're starting out. You just write like the movies you like to watch, right? And I adapted it, and it was also pretty terrible, but it was a little bit better. So I kept writing, and I kept, writing screenplays. Nothing really happened. I got out of that program. That same idea, I started going to San Diego Comic-Con about 13 years ago, back when it wasn't the Hunger Games. If anybody has gone to San Diego or tried to get passes at San Diego Comic-Con recently, it's literally, you have to, destroy everybody in your way, push down little kids, get to that line to get that pass. About 13 years ago, I started going to San Diego Comic-Con, and I didn't even come to comics until about then. And I started reading comics, and I didn't know that. I thought it was all capes and tights. And I read a comic called Lock and Key, which I don't know if you can see it down here, but it's in my shelf. It's by Joe Hill and Gabe Rodriguez. And it taught me that it taught me what kind of story you could write in comics, you could tell in comics. And it sort of just blew my mind and broadened my horizons. And so I thought, I have this idea that was a book that was terrible, a screenplay that was a little less terrible. Why not make it into a comic? At some point, it's going to be, palatable. And that's what I did. And I pitched it as an idea to a very small publisher. And it's that you'll remember in your career when you get that first email that's like, oh my God, is my toe in the door here? When they responded, they're like, we love the idea. Let's talk more about it. And I made that as my first comic book. Since then, it's kind of gone nowhere, but it got me my next job, which was writing this comic book called Alien Bounty Hunter with Mark Wahlberg and Steve Levinson, who did Leverage and Entourage. It was an idea they came to us with, and we wrote the comic book that was kind of the proof of concept for a movie that may or may not ever get made. From that, I went back and wrote a spec screenplay because I felt like I was starting to learn how to write stories through comic books. And that screenplay, I sold it because it was better than the stuff that I'd done before. And somebody really dug it. And then I took that screenplay and I had it, and I wrote Canto, which is my IDW book. It's the sort of dark fantasy Fable, Fairy Tale, Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, that sort of thing. And it kind of took off from IDW as a comic book. And then Will Smith's company got interested in it, and we started talking to them about it. And the screenplay I sold, I had as a sample. So I had a comic that was my best comic to date. I had a screenplay that was my best screenplay to date. And that's when they came on board and said that, you know, they agreed that I could adapt it, you know, as a movie. And so it was like this process of comics and screenwriting and all sort of working together to make me a better storyteller, to put me in a place where, you know, I was ready to take that next step in my career. And I made a note because one of the things I love, I'll never stop writing comics. I'm doing Firefly, I'm doing Killer Queens. Killer Queens is, you know, all LGBTQ team that's like two gay former assassins that are going across the galaxy and they're on the run from their former boss, who's a fluffy monkey with a jetpack. And it's just hijinks. It's just ridiculous. But if I went into a room and pitched that as a TV show, everybody would be like, that's awesome, that's awesome. And then you get an email 12 hours later, it's like, oh, we're gonna pass, sorry. But I have a comic book now and it's all, you know, loud noises and flashing lights in this comic book. And I think people are really gonna, you know, we've already seen some interest and it's not even out until August. So, you know, I love that story. I love Canto. I'm telling stories that I love. That's what I recommend. Find a story you love and just tell it. But I was going to say, one of the things that I love so much about comics is it's probably going to take 3 years for Canto to become an animated movie, right? And in the meantime, we're going to have like 27 issues of Canto. Almost every month, I'm going to have something physical and tangible to show people when Avallone invites us all over for his cocktail party and we have to talk about what we're working on. I'm going to have it rolled up in my back pocket. I'm going to say, this is it. You can touch it. You can feel it. Have I seen anything you've done? Well, yeah. Now you have, right? So
that is so much the joy of it.
It's so great. And then, you know, having something come out monthly, and I think everybody in the panel can attest to this, social media is so important. And there's only so many vague tweets that you can send out over the course of 12 months as the movie is getting off the ground, right? But, you know, if you have a comic book every month, you don't have to vague tweet. You can say, here's the cover, here's some interiors, look how awesome this creative team is. And, you know, you have something to talk about on social media and people start thinking, oh, instead of trying to make yourself seem important, you actually, you know, you have something to say and something to show. And so as you're writing your specs or you're adapting comics or short stories or anything like that, having a story that you're telling that you can share with the world right away is going to be so important to create your own story of who you are as a storyteller and as a writer. And that's one of the big reasons I recommend going into comics is to have that rolled up in your back pocket, ready to show any producer at Avallone's house, of course.
Of course.
Can I just hype you for a second? I have read Killer Queens and it's amazing and it's so much fun and I love it so much. So let me just like hype girl a little bit. Okay.
I want to hit on one of the points that Melody made it a little bit, David made it a little bit. There's a lot to be said for the pressure of deadlines and for the fact that an artist is sitting in their living room going, I can't pay the rent if Avallone doesn't send me pages that I can draw. So I never keep an artist waiting because never, ever be the person who is keeping someone from. Howard Chaykin told me a story once. If you don't know the name, Howard's a legend in the comics industry, an incredible creator, a groundbreaking creator. He worked in television for 20 years in the middle of his comic book career. And he told me that when he was literally recruited, a producer called him up and said, come to Hollywood and write television. And he one day said, well, you know, just out of curiosity, why did you pick me? He said, well, a TV writer maybe writes one script by themselves in a 23 episode season. Everything else, they're contributing, they're throwing out ideas in the room. He's like, you guys who do comic books, you're writing a 22-page script every 10 days, every 15 days, or you starve to death because the industry doesn't pay you that well. And he's not wrong about that. But this producer's perspective that comic book people, way more than screenwriters, are story generators, because we are not sitting around, as I said earlier, waiting for the lightning bolt to strike. We are like, I got to give Dave Acosta something to draw by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and he's in Detroit, so that means 6 a.m. my time. So that's the time that I have to do this. And that pressure is fantastic. And comic books have made me such a better writer and so much faster at solving a story problem, because I do not have the luxury of, I believe I will take a stroll around the promenade and take tea on the veranda until, you know, the muse comes to, you know, set upon my shoulder and whisper her genius. No, I got an hour to get past this. And that pressure is, I recommend it. It's actually fantastic. If you can put that pressure on yourself, even better. But the pressure of coming from a publisher, an editor, an artist who's waiting on you is a fantastic thing.
I want to add something to that. There's another aspect to comic books that I think translates well to TV especially, but even film. It's that this collaborative aspect. You're working with your editor and you're working with the artist, and it's very direct. And especially if we're working with the artist, you have to be incredibly clear and concise in what you write, so that and communicate well with the artist, so that the artist will not only be able to create what you thought you wanted, but then leave it open so that the artist can come back with something that you didn't even realize could be so great and amazing. It's so much better than what you could have even imagined. And that's just, it's this like kind of fine line that I think works well for TV and film as well, that you're not dictating, you're creating a sandbox with somebody. And hopefully you have an artist who gets you, and then you kind of manage it, and then you end up with this incredible work because you've collaborated with these other artists.
Yeah, and this dovetails nicely into a question from one of the attendees. How does the relationship between writer and artist compare in comics versus, say, a writer and director in film? You answered that very beautifully, I thought. I mean, the thing I will add is that it's different in every case, right? I have seen whatever relationship you need, you will find it. I have seen screenwriters write screenplays, hand it off to an artist who then becomes the director, interprets the thing into panels, you know, writes it just like a final draft screenplay, right? I'm not like that. You know, I went to the LA Film School. I went to the American Film Institute Conservatory and studied directing. So I very much treat it like I am directing a small film. You know, in fact, one of the more popular panels that I do at cons is something called Directing Your Comic Book, where I cast the writer creator as the director of his or her own little movie. And your artist, your colorist, they are your DP, your production designer, your costumer, and you are communicating with them in those terms. Like Melody said, just like in a film, if you hire brilliant people, listen to them, right? You know, the best idea in the room wins. Like a dictator has no place on a film set. They have no place in comics. So there's that. I mean, all that said, to reiterate, when I do the directing your own comic panel, I usually have a friend of ours named David Pepos next to me as the other panelist. And the first thing he does is disagree with me. He's like, no, that's not the case. And so he has a different take on it. So there's no easy answer to that. Some of the panelists may have other relationships for it. But what inspired me to do this for you guys at the LA Film School is that you are getting this directing education, you are getting this cinematography education, you know, and so this is not a case, you know, as the creator of your own book, you're not handing it off to somebody to just execute. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, as a writer for films, you don't have a lot of power. You write it in an office like this, you send it off, and somebody goes off and makes it. I mean, I'm on set from time to time. Now in TV, it's different, right? You know, you're often producing the episode that you wrote. You are kind of the final say on things a lot, and that's a way to look at it too, is that you're running a show, maybe, particularly if it's going 10 issues, 12 issues, something like that. There are a lot of ways to look at that metaphor. Just don't let it become a meta 5, I guess.
I would also say it varies. The relationship with the writer and artist varies on what kind of project you're doing. So if you're doing your own IP, it's really good communication. You're together, you're working on it together. If, say, you're doing a superhero comic for DC Comics, yep, you have an editor and you may never talk to your artist ever in your life. Yeah. Usually you write your script. I also am a like panel by panel, very visual, I write it all out, but then I pass that off to my editor. My editor gives me any notes. I adjust it. Then it goes off to my artist. Sometimes I see pencils to give notes. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I see colors. Sometimes I don't. I always see the lettering that the letterer does. So like once the word balloons happen and your dialogue's in there, then I see it so that I can adjust dialogue and that I can adjust dialogue based on the art. But at that point, unless I notice something that is really huge, the art is kind of locked in and there's nothing I can do or say about it. Now, different editor relationships, sometimes I can really I'm always allowed to like make comments or say something, but if it's not, if it's more creator owned or indie comics, it works a little differently and you're much more in a symbiotic relationship. But when you're working, if you ever work for like DC or Marvel or something like that, you're actually not gonna have a lot of say about the art once it goes to your editor. So just one.
The editor is the director in that case for the most part. Yeah. That's a very good point. Go ahead, David.
Amanda, I'm going through that exact thing right now. It's so fun because on Firefly, I wrote the script and it's Boom Studios, and I sent it over and they said, "Oh, great, thank you, it's great." And I don't know if I'm ever going to see anything until I get comps in the mail. But on the flip side of that, I do Canto, which is our own, creator-owned book, and the artist Drew Zucker and I are on DMs multiple times a day. He sends me like pencils of panels, and he's like, "Look at this, look at this." So constantly we are, communicating because we have that kind of relationship. And I'll add, the relationship that you have with the artist also depends on how long you've been working with them or if you know them. Mm-hmm. So I have Canto and I have Killer Queens. Killer Queens, Claudia Balboni, I haven't worked with her before. So, it's kind of work out there, that shared language for that comic. With Canto, Drew and I have been through so many issues with it that we've got shorthand. Yeah. I can say, we're going to call back to this thing, which was 5 issues ago. And I don't have to really explain where to find it. He just knows what it is. He knows who these characters are. So, and I feel I haven't had the, pleasure of working with many directors, but I feel like if you have a relationship with the director, there could be that shared language that they can kind of get in your head a little bit and know what you're saying on the page.
Yeah, and I have artists who have like sneakily, like that we know each other, we've worked together a lot, and then they'll send me an email like, before I send this to the editors, is this what you meant? And then also there's my wife, when Kat Staggs and I work together, even if it is for a big company as we are working together right now, I get to see everything before anybody else.
Yeah.
She's not at her easel, just like hiding it from you.
No, she's probably working on it behind this window right now, honestly.
I want to say that, I think one of the things that few people understand about all of these industries is that none of these relationships are set in stone. I have worked on films where the director had the least input in what was going on the screen. And sometimes that was born of their experience. Sometimes that was born of their ineptitude. I've worked on movies where a good director of photography, a good script supervisor, and a great actor are the reason the movie was the way it was. And then an editor polished it to make it something good. And the director actually had less creative input than you might think. And it's the same, unless you're in the room while something is being made. It always cracks me up in reviews when I say, well, the genius of blank is that he made this choice here. And I'm like, the editor suggested that, man. I can even tell that watching, you could not be wrong. And, and there are directors who are fantastic at working with actors who probably wouldn't know which end of a camera to look in. And again, the industry supports these people. Some of these people win Oscars for Best Director. That's just the way it is. And it's the same thing. You're reading a comic book, you do not know who suggested what. The writer could have laid out a very specific diagram of what the issue was supposed to look like, and the artist just simply followed that 1, 2, 3. Or the funniest thing in there might be something that the artist came up with. I'm lucky in that Dynamite, who I've worked with for a long time, is a very small publisher, and they pretty much leave me completely alone. My artists send me layouts, pencils, and inks. I usually do a pass on the dialogue after the inks, because in a way I'm looking at the dailies for the first time and going, oh, let me ADR that line because that didn't actually work the way I thought it would. Or the artist drew something that's actually pretty funny, but it needs a line of dialogue. In one of my first comic books, there was a panel where a policeman was, what the description was, a policeman is watching 2 workmen hang a banner in front of the police station that says Kurtz for mayor. And for whatever reason, the artist drew the workman standing on the very top step of the ladder, and maybe even on his tiptoes. And just the way the artist drew the cop with his hands on his hips looking up, I added the line, I'm just saying he's the richest man in town. He could have gotten you a bigger ladder. That's not like the greatest joke in the world, but the art suggested, like, I just thought it was like, why is the ladder not 3 steps taller than that? That's just kind of funny that it's this insignificant, it's this ladder that just barely makes it possible to do the job. And I think that opportunity, the one part of film that I think prepared me the most for being a comic book writer was actually my years and years and years in post-production, because having supervisorship of the art and of the lettering and the colorist is exactly like sitting there with the colorist and the sound mix and the color correction and the score and all of that, being willing to just keep your eyes on the thing. I'm sure there are comic book writers, even without the DC Marvel corporate pressure, who submit a script and then just walk away. Like, okay, good luck. Hope it comes out nice. And, my experience in independent films, I would sometimes edit a film and hand it off. And only once did I do that and then not attend the online, the negative cut, the sound mix, the scoring, because 1,000 times I was sitting in the color correction going, no, that's not, that absolutely isn't what that is supposed to look like, guys. Like, I'm sorry, I'm the only one in this room that remembers what we were talking about when we cut this, but that's not right. Like, oh, you dropped out that sound effect that is crucial to a story point because no one took a note and nobody wrote it down. And that part of comic books is very related to making films.
And I want to just add to the idea that you have to kill your darlings that we always hear in film, and you can't be too precious. It goes also very often with comic books, and I'm in this place now where my comic book OMNI we're developing it for TV pitches, and we've attached this amazing director, Seth Mann, who's he just did the first 2 episodes of Blind Spotting, and he's done just about every show you can imagine, and I love his work. And it's such an education for me to have his perspective on the pitch of developing the comic book into a TV series, because it's really crossing all the different lanes. And the most important thing, because if you do create that IP and you do end up hopefully in that situation where that IP is very well going to go forward into this, it will have to eventually, if it's going to go to series, into this pitch world and this development world, you have to be open. You have to be open to hearing someone's critique and someone else's ideas, because you're moving into a different medium and there's things you may not realize. And it's been such an education for me. And then on the flip side of that, the Netflix feature that I'm working on is an adaptation of a fantasy book that's not been published yet. And so I'm given pretty much carte blanche on that script, but I'm also sensitive to the author who had several meetings with that author so that I would honor what her vision is. And so it's this really kind of teeter-tottering back and forth, and just everybody having respect for each other's point of view, even if you don't agree, even if it doesn't go your way, is really important.
Okay, guys. Well, I mean, I feel like we could go for another 3 hours. This has been amazing. I feel it's been great, but we are bumping up against the 90-minute mark, and I know you guys have things to write and kids to hug and books to polish. And in Booher's case, we will go around and kind of do our sign-offs here. Sorry we didn't get to a few of the questions that popped up. This tends to happen when I get an enthusiastic bunch of folks together. If you still have questions, hit us up on social media. We'll tell you how to do that in just a minute here. I know these people well. They are more than happy to to point you in the right direction, to give you a little nugget of advice, me included. So please hit us up. We look forward to that. Conclusion, if it is not wildly obvious right now, the film, TV, and comics worlds are now hopelessly intertwined, for better and for worse. I think if you ignore any one of these mediums, you kind of do so at your own peril as a creator. And we can probably go ahead and include podcasts and fiction and all of that into it. As everyone here has said, become a storyteller, become a writer, become a creator, and not just a screenwriter or a novelist or a comic book writer or creator. You're missing out. And also, I think it would be really, really cool, and give me a hell yeah if you think so. Also, if the LA Film School, a world-class visual storytelling institution, had a couple of comic book classes. I think the students would dig it. I think they would benefit from it. I think you would see a lot of people kind of embracing again the like intertwined nature of all of this stuff. So I don't know. You have some pretty damn good would-be teachers right here on this panel. People with stuff to say. People who inspire young minds. I don't know, give us a call, LAFS. I love putting people on the spot like that. But we're wrapping up now, of course. Let's go around and tell us where to find you, what you're up to, our classic kind of writer's block send off. Melody, you are on screen right now, as far as I can tell. So why don't you go ahead and go first?
You can find my episodes at Beji, which was submitted for Emmy consideration. It was the first episode I ever wrote, and that was cool. Beji and Quota on Two Sentence Horror Stories on Netflix. You can find my episode, Our Words Will Not Be Heard, is my episode on Law and Order SVU. You can get OMNI from Volume 2 from Simon & Schuster, Comixology. Same for Noir, Noir's the New Black from Fair Square. And the Netflix feature is in the works. And so hopefully and the podcast will be up within 9 months. So that's a little while. And the horror one will be within the same time frame. So a bunch of stuff in development and some stuff you can watch now.
Rock and roll. Amanda, let us know.
Hi, I am on Twitter all the time, literally all the time. It's how I procrastinate when I'm writing, at Amanda Deibert, and that's DEI because it's German. I also, on Monday nights, I have a live podcast where you can call in and talk to me tonight at 8 p.m. our time, Cafe at the End of the World. The link will be on my Twitter, so feel free to join in that. I'm happy to answer any questions anywhere. Upcoming comic book stuff, I've got Joan Jett and the Black Arts available for pre-order, and Red Sonja Black White Red is out now, and lesbian noir graphic novel set in the 70s called Work for a Million that's also coming out, and DC Superhero Girls if anybody likes middle grade comics.
Rock and roll. Avallone, do it up. You're on screen.
Just want to say I put my email address in the chat. I will talk to anybody who wants any thoughts, feelings, advice, has any questions. I sometimes do a panel about networking at conventions, and the main thing I say is, it's a community. Film is a community. Comics is a community, and ask not what comics can do for you, ask what you can do for comics. And I think always, when you go up the ladder, you leave it there for others to climb after you. I have Elvira Meets Vincent Price coming out in August. That'll run 5 issues now, probably run a little longer. If you go to my website, it branches off to all of the things, all of the social media stuff where you can find my work. And yeah, like I said, if you want to talk comics or movies, feel free to reach out. And thanks for the time.
David Booher.
Yeah, so you can find, I think I mentioned it once or twice, Killer Queens from Dark Horse. You just visit the website. You can tell I'm in promotion mode, right? darkhorsecomics.com, I think is what it is. And you can find links there. You can find links to Canto through IDW Publishing, as well as on Amazon. It's probably the easiest place to find it. Firefly, watch for that release from Boom Studios in September. And I just put my Twitter and Instagram handles in the chat. And yeah, I think I will second Avallone's comment about networking. And ask, what did you say? Ask what you
ask not comics? What comics can do for you. Ask
yeah.
what you can do for comics.
It's, get out there and network, but networking means just meeting and becoming friends with folks in comics. Don't come out hot from the gate asking for something. Yeah. Just be the kind of person you want to hang out with. And then, the asks will come down the road. I just asked Amanda for a pull quote, and I would have never done that prior to knowing her. So,
and I was happy to do it.
But we just got to be friends. And then at that point is when you make the asks. So just, if you have questions, contact us. We're always open. We're always available. And we can be the start of your network.
Rock and roll. I am Rylend Grant. For some reason, the picture is not changing over to me. Are you guys seeing me, or are we still seeing Booher?
I'm seeing you.
You're seeing me. Okay, well, interesting. I guess it's just my thing. I'm getting freaked out by it. Technology! I am Rylend Grant. I am at Rylend Grant on all forms of social media. It's right there on the picture there. But if you are listening on the Writer's Block podcast right now, you're not seeing it. And so I will spell it. It is at Rylend Grant, one word, RYLENDGRANT. I made this joke in the green room, but I have to spell it because it is not a real word. It's not a real name. My parents drunkenly arranged letters and saddled me with it, and so yeah, now I have to spell it for you. But you can find me there. I am very active and all of that noise. My books, the Ringo Award-winning Aberrant and the 4-time Ringo-nominated Banjax, are available in fine comic shops everywhere and via Amazon and Comixology and all that noise. My other books, The Peacekeepers, my Fargo-esque crime drama, and my astral projection thriller, The Jump, are available right now via Backer Kit. If you go to The Jump one word, the number 2, thejump2.backerkit.com. You'll find those there, as well as cool signed copies of Aberrant and Banjax and rare con variants. And if you're a collector, it's a great place to go. It's the one-stop Rylend Grant shop. You should also, if you're interested in comics, Mr. Avallone and I have a podcast where we kind of have informal chats with creators like the ones you're seeing today. They've all been on the podcast, where we just kind of start talking about a comics business topic, and then it sort of over time ends up kind of veering off course, and we always end up arguing over which is the best Star Trek captain or whatnot. But it is good, solid comic book knowledge. It's called The Writer's Block with David Avallone and Rylend Grant. So it is on iTunes, and you can find it on YouTube and Spotify and wherever else you get your ear cracks. So go check that out if you are interested. Yeah, and you know what? If if there is interest in comics and comics how to, maybe some of us will come back in the near future, and we'll do the directing your comic panel that would probably be great for a bunch of would-be directors here. But something that is already scheduled, and Whitney will like that I'm doing this, I am set to moderate and crew a crowdfunding panel. So we will be talking Kickstarter on Monday, August the 30th at 3 p.m. Right here during LAFS's Fame Week. So that will be most likely for you guys more film slanted. I may actually ask Avallone to be on that panel. I haven't yet, but I probably will.
I saw that one coming.
I don't think any of you other folks have. You guys haven't done movie Kickstarters, have you? I don't think so. But yeah. Anyway, so you'll probably see Avallone's beautiful mug again, that great suit, those sharp glasses, and that incredible mustache. You will most certainly see me, and you will see another collection of film luminaries. So join us then. Thank you so much, guys, for doing this. This was this exceeded my my wildest dreams of what this could have been. It was awesome. So thank you to the panelists, and thank you to you, LAFS, for hosting us. And thanks everybody for showing up and enthusiastically embracing this thing. So see you guys soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Like honey, what you do ain't fun. You stick to me like I stick to you like honey. What I do ain't fun. Stick to you like But do we even try if we never win? 'Cause I know it's so safe when I touch your skin. So we pretend it's fine, ignore the signs, but we can't get through this. We can keep doing this every time, but for now it hurts too much to say goodbye. So one more time, turn a blind eye and let's just do this. Now I'm seeing double, 'cause I can take the trouble. I think it's time to accept that you'll be mine. And now I'm seeing double, 'cause I can take the trouble. I think it's time to accept that you stick to me like you stick to me like honey. What you do ain't fun. You stick to me like I stick to you like honey.